Hi everyone, let's talk about Papà Paolo. Now, when I was in Essen, I actually got a chance to sit down with someone from Quined Games. Forgot to ask them how to pronounce the name of the company, but the member of staff and a couple of other visitors to the booth, and I got to play a three-player game of Papà Paolo to get a feel for what it was like before I got it home. We've played it two players since. And, I really like the action selection in the game, the way that it's kind of tied with expanding your map, so you're always kind of making sacrifices. Whether you are taking an action that you really want, or you are taking the map tile that you're desperate for, you are giving up something. And the majorities at the top of the rows and columns, that adds to that as well, because that's another thing that's got to go into that calculation of, I really want this map tile here, but this one's not as good, but it would get me the majority in two really good columns and get me the money I need to win the auction. The auction is another really cool part in the game with more than two players. It's got these columns that affect how you can bid, and there is definitely more competition in the delivery tiles. And you saw if you saw the playthrough, then there are 4 of these delivery tiles in every round, and you remove 2 of them for the 2-player game, 1 of them for a 3-player game. And so there was more competition in the 3-player game, and that's true for pretty much every part of the game, really. I really like the systems of the game, and the experience of the 3-player game was much better. Not that the 2-player experience was bad at all, but the 3-player game was just more tight, and I would expect that to extend into the 4-player game as well, because there is even more competition over the rows and columns. There's more stuff out there, and there are more rows and columns to begin with, and just more competition overall. There are only enough spaces on the action grid in a 3 and 4-player game to accommodate all of the markers. So no matter what, somebody is going to get stuck with something at the end. And, your options get limited as it goes on anyway. That happens in a 2-player game. But it's absolutely happened every round, and happened to me a good few times, where you thought that you had everything planned out and I can leave this action to the end. But then you find out that you've got one space to go to. You've got absolutely no choice. Do you want to do this prescribed action here, or do you want to take the map tile? And the thing you wanted to do, tough luck. You should have done that when there was chance to do it earlier. That is kind of gone from the 2-player game, because there are more spaces that do double actions. Well, not double, but you can choose between 2 things. And there is always a choice of 2 spaces for the last person. And that doesn't seem like much of a big deal, but it's not just the choice between 2 different map tiles. That's the choice between potentially a lot of different things. If those things are in different rows and columns, there could potentially be a lot of different actions that they're giving you access to by being 2 things available. So that is one thing where, you've got to plan ahead more. In a 2-player game, you've probably still, in our experience, you can still do what you want if you're the very last person to go. Whereas being the last person in turn order in a game with 3 or 4 players is a much bigger risk, because what you want would probably not be there by the last turn. The auction, as I said, is more interesting anyway. That's kind of inherent, isn't it? It's a standard auction of bidding more. So with more players, that's a lot more interesting. Because if one person isn't that interested in a 2-player game, well, that kind of kills the auction, because there's no competition over it. The system I mentioned, where you take the 4 delivery tiles and then you remove those. In a 3-player game, I didn't really notice it, because I wasn't familiar that we were removing things yet. But in a 2-player game, certainly, I mentioned this in the playthrough, it can really have a swingy effect on the auction, especially because if, say, the 1 and the 4 comes out, then you have a really powerful thing. I'm trying to find the number 1 and the number 4. So in the very, very last round, the person with the 1 will get to deliver 5 pizzas that can only be 2 tiles away from their pizzerias. And the person who gets the other tile would be able to deliver 9 pizzas at a range of 4. That's a huge difference. And that could increase competition over the auction in that case. But it does mean that one person is getting really messed up by not getting the bigger tile. On the other hand, though, it happens a lot where, say, it doesn't matter if it's the 3 or the 4 or the 1 or the 2. It means that there is barely any difference. You know, the 3 and the 4 in the 5th round, it's the exact same range. It's just one person's going to get to deliver 7 pizzas, the other person 9 pizzas. So that's a 2-point difference if you can deliver all of the pizzas that are on those tiles. So that really drives down the auction. There's no real point. I don't really care whether you get to deliver 2 more pizzas or not. I will, save my money and get those points elsewhere, hopefully. So, as I said, it's not a bad experience at all as a 2-player game. It's just definitely more loose, and yeah, it's a much more easygoing game with 2 players because there is a lot more freedom in the auctions and deliveries and the action selection as well. And the biggest tension comes when a really good delivery tile and a really bad delivery tile come out at the same time, and you've got to decide what you're going to do to get whether you're going to go all out to get the better one. Because money isn't worth anything as well. That's worth mentioning. Money isn't worth anything at the end of the game. So hoarding it to try and win auctions, and then finding out that in the very last round the auction doesn't really matter because the delivery tiles are very similar, that can be, a little annoyance. But that is specifically for a 2-player game. And if you are going to be playing this at higher player counts, it's a fantastic game. I would only say that because we generally only ever play 2-player, and it's rare that we play with more, then it's probably not one to keep for us, just because I thought it was so great when it had that tension in the 3-player game. But if 2-player is just one of the options for you, then it's definitely a game to look at, I think. That's Papà Paolo. So thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll see you for the next game. Bye, everyone.